very much. It's always it's a bit embarrassing to hear people talk about you in such glowing terms, even though you wrote it yourself. It's funny looking at the Billy Crystal video, given my age and the various years I've gone through seeing technology go from Betamax and 8-track cassette recorders through to iPods and now smartphones. I actually feel like him in some respects, but I think it's actually quite important to recognise that someone like Billy Crystal in that video is probably the growth audience now for technology, because technology is fairly saturated amongst the student demographic. And one of the things that I've learned is that students constantly, they really inspire me. I didn't realise how much until I stopped being a student. At the time, I think, as a British student, I was quite focused on, the bar. It's not the bar as an illegal thing, actually the bar that you go and buy your wine and lager from. And obviously in the UK, we take that quite seriously. But what I noticed when I came over to the States is that, and also with this current generation, there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit and a lot of tenacity that exists with students, and they really do form the future of any organisation. And technology, of course, is the thing that they really they embrace, and they do before anyone else, and they then tell everyone else where they should be going. And one of the key things actually that we always tend to miss when we look at it from our perspective is that we are not them, and we should really be asking them what it is that they want to see. How do they want us to engage with them? What would be most effective? We make a lot of grand assumptions, and certainly working in advertising and marketing, sometimes we make mistakes based on those assumptions. And really, the best way to achieve the greatest results is to talk to the very people you're trying to attract and retain. And the co-op model, I hadn't really been familiar with this, by the way, before Muriel and Adam invited me to do this. And I did some due diligence, like you would, in case any of you were to ask me a question later, as much as when I ask you one about the difference between Android and Apple iOS, you'll answer straight away. I'd expect you to. Mind you, that might not be the 5% of poll answerers who did not say they had a mobile phone, which was a very strange one. I'm going to hunt you down, by the way, and we'll go down to the shop, Rogers Telecom, and buy phones together, because there's no excuse to be here and not have a phone. So I will, and I'll give you a little slap on the wrist at the same time, because in the old days, corporal punishment was still all right. So, I mean, one of the things about the mindset with students now is they also do a lot of research, and they're researching employer opportunities as much as anyone would research things on Amazon, for instance, to buy a new television set or indeed a new smartphone. And so you need to make sure that your presence is an authentic one that actually sells the whole ethos of what they're looking for. Sustainability is a big thing at the moment, corporate social responsibility, how are we addressing these desires of the student populace. Those are the things that are actually going to make the difference when someone says, I want to be involved with organisation X versus Y, is the things that are close to their hearts. And they're also very willing to share that information with you. So much of my career was really looking at how do we use technology to greatest effect? Are we making the most of it, and what chances are we missing? And what is it due to? Is it due to lack of understanding? Is it due to lack of resource? My feeling is it's probably due to a bit of both combined. But what I would say is that if you've got the understanding, then it makes it much easier to gather the resource that allows you to, be successful in your technology endeavours as it towards recruiting the perfect match, as it were. The other thing is, these keynote presentations tend to be a bit of a whiz-bang slideshow fest, as it were, and I'm trying to move away from that in the first half. We will get down to some slides because a picture paints 1,000 words, as they say. But the reality is a true keynote is supposed to set the theme. It's supposed to enthuse the audience about what's to come, as much as a closing keynote address is to wrap it all up and say, this is what we did. Consider this the embarking on a journey that we're all going to travel down, and hopefully, as you said at the start, Muriel, we're going to end up learning something and taking something back. And if you take one vignette from any of the presentations you see today, this has been worth your while. And obviously it gives you that extra facility to take back to the people who hold the money and say, we need to invest in X, Y, Z because David Spector said so. And then they'll say, who's David Spector? Because I've heard someone say that when you announced me in the first instance. Hopefully, by this time next year, that question won't exist, because you go, oh, David Spector, that guy, I know him. Yeah, he said this thing, and it made a big difference to how we were operating. So yeah, self-doubt sets in. Can I hold the court in this room for an hour? Actually, it's not that difficult once you start. As you can see, now I'm just on a roll. So the other thing is, yeah, do I need a slideshow? Well, actually, you know, some of the greatest presentations in history didn't use a slideshow. Eisenhower didn't do one at his exit address, nor did Winston Churchill. Right? They didn't need PowerPoint or Prezi, and they were quite fine all on their own without any assistive digital technology. So I'm going to avoid it for a little while, and I want you to really think about what I'm saying here. It's actually it's interesting when I talk about social media. I have a lot of colleagues who are avid Facebook users, tweeters. Do you call them Instagrammers? I don't even know what the noun for someone who Instagrams is. We're actually redefining language as it stands, much like you said. In the UK we say we hoover instead of vacuuming, because the brand has become synonymous with the action. That's very much how you say Googling. You know, this language now becomes a part and parcel of our normal lexicon on a day-to-day basis. But they always question my right to be able to address you in this way, because I'm not a massive user of social media, but it's a choice I've made. So if you went out and tried to search for me now via Facebook, you won't find me on Twitter, because I've never thought I had anything that important to tweet. And I always like my colleagues will tweet on my behalf. And we have a great marketing department back at TMP in New York who really look after me in that way. In fact, not unlike Adam over here, who's one of the most fantastic marketers I've met. So I would actually say And Adam, by the way, that wasn't just pure sycophancy. I really meant it, okay? But I mean, I made a choice. I started using Facebook many years ago, and as time went by, I mean, I need to use it to understand how the interface has changed, to understand how we can incorporate it in what I'm doing from a mobile perspective, to understand privacy. That was really what it was for me. I went all the other way. I was, how much of this privacy stuff can I use so that I make this as private as possible? And then I said to these people who said, you don't use it, you have no right. I do use it, I just use it in a different way. And this is an important thing to understand. Just because something is there doesn't mean everyone's going to use it the same way. And you have to be cognizant of the fact that sometimes the people who are very vocal on social media are actually projecting what they would like to be. It's a kind of alternative reality about what that individual is. So it's a dangerous place to go to judge people just on that. So, you know, recruiters have now kind of started looking at Facebook profiles to make some sort of pre-assessment about an individual before they offer them an interview or even speak to them face to face. I would say be very wary about that approach, because I don't think it's accurate, and I think a lot of the time it actually doesn't tell the story as it should be. It lacks the authenticity. I see a lot of people, there's never a bad photo really on Facebook unless someone else took it off you, right? And generally you get tagged and then you go look at it and you say, I don't like that one, I was grimacing in a funny way, or I looked like I was in severe pain, so I'm not going to allow that to be posted. So it's very selective. I always say no one ever had a bad time on Facebook. Every party's the best party in the world, every meal's the most delicious, but we know that not to be true, because I've had many bad meals myself and I've had many terrible party experiences. Not that I like to party, you would never have guessed. So the key thing to bear in mind there is that it is one type of one perception of looking at an individual that is not necessarily the right way. And also from an employer and educational institution's perspective, you might actually be presenting some sort of content that says you're the greatest, you do X, Y, Z, and in reality you don't live up to that promise. You have to be very wary of it, because ultimately, if you don't live up to the promise, that will go out and that will be the most important message people read. So if you think you're offering great opportunities to people and you're saying there's a wonderful career progression path here, and then actually the reality is that none of that comes to fruition, the candidate, the student or the employee will go off and say straight away, that was all a bunch of lies, and then that goes and spreads like wildfire, and then the damage done to your brand is actually much more severe than if you had not said that stuff in the first place. So I mean, that's a really strong tip, and I think we're seeing a bit of a backlash at the moment with social media and how people are using it, where they're starting to get a bit worried about how much content they posted in the past. there are probably a few people in this room who wish they hadn't posted those pictures in 2008, because they're still there. Everything lives forever in the digital media sphere, and you can't delete a lot of it. And more to the point, it's really important to realise that that content ceases to belong to you once you put it up there. So if you post a picture on Facebook or Instagram, the intellectual property actually belongs to Facebook and Instagram, but they're actually the same entity now. Facebook bought Instagram last year, and the bottom line there is that if you really want to own your image and your brand, you need to make sure that you are very selective about how you push it out. And I'd love to know if anyone in this room actually ever read the terms and conditions for Facebook when they signed up. A show of hands who's read that from start to finish. Oh, just one person. That's amazing. So on a percentage, we're looking at probably 0.7% of this room. It's quite a good survey that was, wasn't it? Are you the 5% who doesn't have a smartphone? So, I mean, it's really important to recognise that, and no one does it. I know I'm as guilty as sin when it comes to iTunes says, here's an update, and it tells me to read the terms and conditions, which are always on purpose 60 pages long to deter you from reading them, and you just want instant gratification, so you say, I accept, and then you don't know what happens after that. And we're starting to see a lot of stories coming out setting precedents about this issue. And what I'm waiting for is you know, there've always been these classic legal cases that then were referred to in future legal discussions. I mean, if you just look at it from a movie perspective, Kramer versus Kramer, I don't know if anyone remembers that from way back when. It sets a legal precedent, and there are about to be a few of those things happening in the UK. I'll give you a good example of that. Last year, a very prominent a lord, I believe, was accused of being identified as a paedophile by one of the people who was supposedly the victim. And he was then actually, the person who accused him said, no, I got the wrong person. But that would have been after 4 or 5 weeks of the media then building this whole story about this guy who had nothing to do with the accusation, and it was just because of the fact that someone had made a mistaken identity. So now he said his life has been affected because even though he wasn't the perpetrator, the association is still there and you can't get rid of it. So that's going to set a precedent for a legal case in the UK, and you should keep your eyes open to see what happens with that, because the story here is who gets prosecuted. Are they the reporters that you prosecute, or do you prosecute Twitter, who allowed the content to go up? No one knows at the moment. So if you're actually careful about it, you avoid being in that hot water. So those are things to really take on as being very important. Now I'm just going to open up the slide because I want to have a look at a couple of definitions here. There was the one for Keynote, as I told you, but I wanted to give you an excerpt of Hamlet's social soliloquy, because this I thought would be quite funny. If Hamlet went in to speak to his bosses about, I need a social media strategy, what exactly would he say? Well, he'd say, to be or not to be social, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous Facebook posts, or to take arms against a sea of tweets, and by opposing them to die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end, the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that our employer brand is heir to. And I think that if Hamlet went and he was building the case for the use of social, he would have probably said that, and then his boss would have said, well, actually, we haven't got enough budget for it this year, so take your skull elsewhere.